from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, what bubble? Nvidia reporting much anticipated quarterly results after the close with a beat and raise, the inflection point for the wider market tonight as Wall Street gets a sense of where the billions of dollars being spent on AI are going. Nvidia stock now jumping 5% after the bell. Can today's report help calm fears of an AI bubble, or is the rally revived? We're going to dedicate a full hour of Balance of Power tonight to unpack it all, leading up to an interview, an exclusive conversation with Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang later on tonight, right here on Bloomberg. We'll have every angle of the story covered for you with our reporters in Washington, New York, and San Francisco. Let's kick off our coverage tonight with Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech, of course, live from our San Francisco bureau, who's going to be talking with Jensen Huang a short time from now. Ed, it's great to have you. What does this tell us about fears of a slowdown?
Yeah, I mean, the instant reaction is that there isn't a slowdown, that the demand is intact, and Nvidia used language like sold out and demand being off the charts for Blackwell, their latest generation GPU. So the number is $65 billion plus or minus 2% for the fiscal fourth quarter, which is pretty significantly above consensus, though I'd note there were some very bullish names on the street that thought Nvidia might surprise us and turn around and say they had $75 billion, something like that. But it is in keeping with some of the data points that you and I have discussed on Balance and Power over in the last few weeks. You remember when I was in DC, Jensen Huang had told us that over 6 quarters, they saw $500 billion of sales, importantly excluding China, which was well above what the street had modeled for. So on the face of it, that's the data, though there are some difficult questions for Jensen Huang and his colleagues to answer.
Ed, you mentioned decoding this report. One of the things that was not mentioned in here was China. What do you make of that being excluded, and what do you hope to hear from him when you speak with him in just a few minutes?
Very interesting. Not only was it excluded from the press release, but also excluded from the CFO's commentary document. Back in August, when they gave us the outlook for the fiscal third quarter they just reported, Nvidia was very careful to explain that it didn't assume any H20 sales to China. H20 was the deprecated chip specifically designed for China. We don't know what's going on now because it's simply not mentioned at all, other than the CFO saying that H20 sales were insignificant in the quarter. So that's the big question they're likely to face. Can Nvidia not sell chips to China of some kind? What is it that they've agreed with the President of the United States? And it's also important to say, is you know very well, Laura, what does China have to say about all of this? Because to Jensen Huang and Nvidia's mind, while it's a market they can't currently play in, China is a critically important market for AI and is an end market for data center sales.
Ed, thank you. We've got the right man with us tonight, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, combing through the results, and we'll be on the call when it begins. We'll check back with Ed a little bit later on as the conference call gets underway now. And make sure to catch Ed's interview, as we mentioned, with Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang. The only place you'll see and hear it tonight starts at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. For more on how the markets are moving, specifically Nvidia shares, we turn to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romain Bostic, who joins us live now from World Headquarters in New York. Investors like what they see, Romain.
Yeah, Joe, and as Nvidia goes, so goes the market as well. You see the shares in the after-hours trade up about 8% as that conference call gets underway. The CFO now talking about what she called an outstanding quarter and reiterates a $500 billion revenue promise in the future, something that Ed was alluding to, past comments by Jensen Huang. And you take a look at the broader market, the triple Qs, the main ETF that tracks the NASDAQ, the SPY, the main ETF that tracks the S&P 500, all higher here in the after-hours session. And that is significant because we had a big sell-off heading into this earnings report because there was a lot of concern about whether the AI boom had really become a bubble and whether the air was finally being let out of it. But quite frankly, at least based on what we saw on paper, that does not seem to be the case. Look at some of the other chip makers out there, your Intels, your Broadcoms, your Qualcomms, your AMDs, all getting a modest bid here in the after-hours trade. TSM, ASML as well, also getting bid up. But you're also seeing a lot of these hyperscaler companies. That includes the big names like your Microsoft, your Amazons, your Alphabets, but also these neo clouds like a CoreWeave moving higher by 5, 6, 7%. Iron up about 9, 10% here in the after-hours trade, Joe. And I bring that all up because this is a much broader ecosystem. Nvidia is the granddaddy. It is the biggest weighting out there. But so much of this financial markets right now, Joe, as you know, and for that matter, so much of the economy, and to a certain extent, so much of what's going on in Washington revolves around Nvidia and Jensen Huang keeping this AI machine going. And at least based on what we learned today, it is still going.
It's going for now, but once investors really get to digest this data, they hear from Jensen Huang and move forward. Tomorrow, we're going to be back where we were earlier today with a lot of fears that an AI bubble is just out there beyond the corner.
You know, it's hard to say. It's a great question because it gets to this idea of what exactly are you trying to value into these stocks. It's really easy to do that with Nvidia. You basically just look at the backlog of chips, the orders that they have. You can put a price tag on that and extrapolate into the future what this company would make. It's a lot harder to do that for some of the other companies, as you know, and that's where I think a lot of the trepidation is. It's also the idea of companies that have been spending, basically the companies that are giving their money to Nvidia, giving their money to the hyperscalers, giving their money to the companies that are building out these data centers, and people want to know, where is the return on that? Is there a productivity boost coming from that? Is there an actual investment return? And for those companies, at least, there's a big question mark around that, not only in the short term, but certainly the long term, as you said as well, Laura, going forward.
All right, Romaine, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick with us on Nvidia earnings. Back at the White House now, President Trump is calling on Congress to pass federal standards to govern oversight of AI. In a post on his social media platform yesterday, President said, quote, investment in AI is helping to make the U.S. economy the hottest in the world. But overregulation by the states is threatening to undermine this growth engine, unquote. The push from the president, just one component of his AI agenda as he looks to consolidate regulations around this technology. And when we consider the administration's approach, we look no further than our next guest. Dean Ball, senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, previously served as senior policy advisor for artificial intelligence and emerging technology at the White House. He was the primary author of America's AI Action Plan, released earlier this year. Dean, we talked a lot about it when it came out, and I want to welcome you to Balance of Power. It's great to have you with us here.
Thanks so much for having me.
When you wrote the action plan, were you factoring in this level of growth that Jensen Huang is talking about tonight?
Well, I should say many people across the administration worked on the action plan, and I had the honor of playing a role in it. But yeah, I mean, truthfully, the action plan talks about an industrial revolution, an information revolution, and a renaissance all happening at the same time. And I think that's consistent with the level of growth that we saw today in the Nvidia earnings.
Yeah.
How did you think about an AI bubble and sort of the market growth that we've seen, all of these companies investing in each other and a lot of risk potentially, if one or more of these companies isn't able to live up to its promises?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent you want capitalism to produce a bubble, right? You should want there to be some degree of overinvestment. Every industrial revolution in American history has been coupled with bubbles, railroads, electricity. These things are good. These things are healthy. I think the question is, how long do we have to run? And I think the answer is quite a while. And also, what is the nature of that bubble? I don't think the nature of that bubble is in AI itself. I think it has much more to do with, are there some startups that have frothy valuations? Sure, sure. But I think fundamentally this is a technology with a lot of room to run.
Well, there's a very delicate balance when we have the conversation about regulations, and few people know more about this than you do. The danger of over-regulating and losing the AI race is a real one, whether that's at the federal level or confusion with states who might draw up their own regulations. But under-regulating is a very scary idea for a lot of people as well when you consider the prospect of losing jobs, of losing our own ability to think about things the way we currently do. You've obviously charted out a path here, but I wonder to what extent it evolves with the technology.
I think it's got to. And I think that, the action plan is intended to give lots of optionality, flexibility. I think one of the problems with regulation, in fact, is that it tends to be associated with stasis. Yeah. It tends to lock things into place. And I think that what we need right now more than, any other time is actually flexibility and adaptability.
So one of the things that Joe was mentioning there is this sort of inherent tension between sort of people really liking AI technologies, but not necessarily liking some of the consequences, whether that be fewer entry-level jobs or data centers in their backyard. How, from a regulatory perspective, do you think about getting on both sides of that issue to advance the technology, but also address some of these very real concerns people have?
Yeah, I think you don't want to create a lot of red tape, but I think there are legitimate concerns you need to address. Something like data center zoning, I see that as being fundamentally a state and local issue. We should let data center operators work. There's a federal role to be played for sure, but we should let data center operators work with communities as we've seen them do. And I think that'll continue to happen. When it comes to jobs, I think we don't know the size of the problem that we have. Every industrial revolution, every general purpose technology is associated with some degree of automation. Some jobs go away, some jobs get created. But the labor market, like everything else in our society, is an adaptive system. Humans are full of needs, and we're more ingenious than we think.
Is there nothing that the federal government can do when it comes to your point, permitting, red tape, NIMBYism, access to energy? There are a lot of headwinds here for companies that are overinvesting. They announce a big deal. It's going to be $500 billion and this much compute, but you need workers on the ground. You need water to cool. You need neighbors who allow you in. That's all up to the states?
I think there's a federal role to be played, particularly on electricity.
Okay.
There's permitting. There's transmission. There are things that, especially interconnection to the grid, these are things that can end up holding data centers back for years, and other projects too. It's not just data centers, right? So we need to speed up interconnections, and in fact, the Trump administration has taken action in recent weeks with the Department of Energy to sort of speed some of that up. So I think there is a role to be played, but this is an area where responsibility is shared between local, state, and federal.
I should mention that Nvidia shares are on a tear here. Laura, we're up over 6%, $12 now, approaching, well, it's above $198, remembering that the all-time high, not too far from here, on the 19th of November at $198. We'll see if maybe we get above 200 here by the time Jensen Huang is done talking. It brings about the idea of financing, of course, and the many promises that we've heard from the likes of OpenAI and concerns about, you hear them, circular investing. That's beyond the bubble. The idea that there's some sort of shell game here and a hiding of depreciation. What do you answer these critics with, or do you agree with them?
I think it depends on the specifics, right? In general, one of the things that I think makes makes me bullish on America for AI is that we're quite good at financial engineering. It's one of our, civilizational bread and butter, and so I'm optimistic that most of that will play out just fine. But look, are there dangerous deals that get made? For sure. Again, it's a bubble. Like, you should expect that to be the case. It's just, again, how much damage does it do when it pops? Is it how long does it take, et cetera, et cetera? I think we have many years to run.
Yeah.
What is realistic to expect from Washington when it comes to regulation? Congress has been very, very bad about regulating tech, and the technologies just move so much more quickly than the Senate and the House can. Will we have to rely on just the administration, just the White House, to regulate?
I hope not. That's something that we'll see, I think, in the coming weeks, in fact. So the president, as Joe mentioned, the president tweeted last night about the concept of federal preemption of state AI regulations, and we will see what happens. Congress is working its way through that. There's a lot of deal making going on right now. We don't know what's going to be in that proposal, but the idea of avoiding a state patchwork, or even worse, I think, or just as bad, avoiding an outcome where California and New York regulate AI for the entire country, I think is essential for Congress to get right. And so we'll see.
Dean Ball, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dean.
We'll come back to the big story around Nvidia and AI in just a moment, but first to another headline playing out today: developments in the war in Ukraine. After Reuters reported the U.S. has signaled to Ukrainian President Zelensky he must accept a U.S.-drafted peace framework, which includes a reduction in troops and giving up territory to Russia. That plan reportedly drafted in secret between a high-ranking Trump administration official and Russia, according to Axios. Those reports coming as a series of Russian missiles hit western Ukraine, killing dozens, while Zelensky met with Turkish President Erdogan, who pushed for a renewed Russia-Ukraine talks. For more, let's go to Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan at the White House. Kate, this has been a really, a surprising development, a deal that seems to have come out of nowhere. It appears to include a lot of Russia's wish list, but not so much what the Ukraine was looking for. How is this plan going over at the White House and with Ukrainian officials?
So we're really seeing a renewed push here by the Trump administration to try to get some momentum going again, to try to end the war in Ukraine. And we actually have a couple of big things happening here at the same time. So one is that a delegation of top U.S. military officials have actually arrived in Ukraine for talks. That delegation is being led by the Secretary of the Army. And just the fact that we have top U.S. military officials on the ground in Ukraine definitely signals that the Trump administration is perhaps looking to collaborate with Ukraine when it comes to ways that they can collaborate on the battlefield and trying to ramp up pressure on Russia. And the second big thing that's happening here is what you already mentioned. So Axios is reporting that there is this 28-point peace plan that has been drafted by U.S. and Russian officials. Importantly, Ukrainian officials have not had input here, and European officials haven't either. And so I think we're still, it's unclear how this plan is going to address some of the key sticking points that have been sticking points for a long time, particularly when it comes to territorial concessions, territorial control in eastern Ukraine. But we are all eagerly awaiting to hear more from the White House.
All right, Kate, keep us posted. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan reporting live from the White House North Lawn this evening. We thank you, as always. Straight ahead, much more on our special live coverage of tonight's Nvidia earnings and all the movement that comes with it. We're going to go live to Capitol Hill, speak with the chair of the House Budget Committee, Republican Congressman Jodey Arrington of Texas, and be with us about what's next for lawmakers as the AI boom kicks into gear in states across the country, including his, of course. Later, we'll peel back the curtain on the Trump administration's AI agenda, what it means for the U.S.-China relationship, when we sit down with Ann Neuberger, former Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Tech. That's all ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Jensen, I don't think you can open up a big plant with your friend from Taiwan where we're going to have 40 or 50% of the computer chip business at I don't think you can do that with people that don't even know what a chip looks like. Do you agree with that? This is something they've never done. And we're not going to be successful if we don't allow people that invest billions of dollars in plant and equipment to bring a lot of their people from their country to get that plant open, operating, and working. I'm sorry.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Laura Davison. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. That, of course, President Trump. He was speaking earlier today at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum at the Kennedy Center, commenting on the need to build AI data centers here across the country. America does, in fact, have the most data centers worldwide, with more than 4,100 active data centers nationwide, the largest of which is in Texas, of course, with OpenAI's sprawling Stargate compound working overtime here. And joining us now live from Capitol Hill is Republican Congressman Jodey Arrington of Texas, who's, of course, chair of the House Budget Committee, as well a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and happens to have Stargate in his backyard, in his own district. Mr. Chairman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. We've been having a conversation not only about Nvidia results, but regulations, or if you ask some, lack thereof, surrounding the development of artificial intelligence. You've got Stargate in Abilene, in your great state of Texas here. Why are we sharing this technology with the likes of Saudi Arabia on a day like today?
Well, listen, I think this is a race with China, and I think it's going to involve not only the United States, but our allies. But who would have thought, by the way, that the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world, which is West Texas, a beautiful big swath of rural America, would also be the backbone for AI and this race not only to own the future for AI, but all of the transformational impacts on the economy and national security. So, I think this new report from Nvidia and the earnings, I think investors are confident in this value proposition. And so it's going to be America leading with the support and partnership of our allies. I think that's a good strategy.
Congressman, you had a meeting earlier today with Scott Bessent when he was up on the Hill, and you told him that you didn't think that this idea of a $2,000 rebate check was such a good idea, that should instead go down to paying down the deficit. What did you hear from the Treasury Secretary, and where do you think the administration is going when it comes to both bigger picture fiscal issues for the country as well as the issue of affordability for households?
Well, I guess, first of all, I think the best way to put more money in people's pockets is to have better opportunities and bigger paychecks. That's what happened in the first Trump administration because of the deregulation and also because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was made permanent effectively in the big, beautiful bill. So what we saw from that was income and wages go up about $5,000 to $6,000 on average for median household incomes. So that's the better way. All boats rise on the tide of prosperity. We had the lowest poverty rates in recorded history. We had the lowest unemployment rates. So a strong economy, good fundamentals, and a belief in pro-growth policies, I think, is the answer. And then what I said to him was, look, if we're going to give a dividend check back to the people, let's give it to our children and grandchildren, because the debt at $38 trillion, totally unsustainable, is a deferred tax on them. So if you want to bring the cost of capital down, you want to bring interest rates down, and you want to do good for our children and grandchildren who are going to inherit the whirlwind of this massive and unsustainable debt, let's start paying down the debt. And by the way, he reminded me, the deficit to GDP has gone down just this past year, this fiscal year, for the first time in a decade if you control for COVID. I think we're going in the right direction, but that was my position on how we put more money in people's pockets.
You mentioned jobs, Mr. Chairman, and I wonder if you have concerns about the very technology that we're discussing this evening with Nvidia lighting up the after-hours market, where we're going to be 2, 3, 5 years from now, because a lot of these forecasts are moving up as the technology accelerates. And there's a big concern that we're going to be without entry-level jobs at some point that help to start a lot of careers. Is that something Washington should be helping to guide?
I think there will be some retooling and retraining of the workforce. I think it should be driven by industry with the states who are closest to the opportunities and the changing dynamics of their local and state economies. And I think there's a partnership role the federal government can play. But I personally, I think the best way to retool that is in partnership with the local governments and the private sector who know exactly what their need is. But there's no doubt there'll be some disruption, there'll be adjustments. But listen, to not engage in the AI race, to not have that application for more effective, efficient every sector of our economy and the tremendous enhancements to our security is just, it's not acceptable. So you've got to do it. We just have to do it right and responsibly and understand there will be some things to manage, like what you mentioned about the workforce.
Congressman, in the last 30 seconds that we have you, do you see a role for an AI bill to move through Congress, in the next coming months?
Well, I heard some of the discussion before joining you. I think there's a real delicate balance. One of the reasons the boom in data centers are happening in West Texas is because of low cost of energy, but also just a good business-friendly environment. We have low regulation, so lots of certainty and predictability. That is the environment for investment to flow and for growth and prosperity. So we don't want to overdo it, all right? But we also don't want this patchwork of 50 states with a layer of federal regulations. So we've got to be smart, put some general safeguards in place, and do not crush the innovation that has put us in a position to gain tremendously, economically and beyond.
We've still got a lot to figure out, Congressman, so let's keep talking. Republican Congressman Jodey Arrington of Texas, we thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming up, we're going to look at how the market is moving in after-hours trading following that Nvidia earnings report. We're up about $10 or 5% right now after the close, and much more ahead here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Laura Davison. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for spending part of the after-hours session with us. After Nvidia reported earnings just over an hour ago, the stock now rising about 5% in after-hours trading, and it's impacting the whole neighborhood as we keep an eye on other chip makers. AMD currently on the rise as well. It's up about 0.5%. Intel is rising almost 4%. Qualcomm is up about 1.5% as we make our way through now the earnings call. And that includes Jensen Huang, who's just getting on that call now. And I want to note that we'll have a live and exclusive interview with Jensen Huang the head of Nvidia, coming up at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the only conversation you're going to hear with Jensen Huang outside of the conference call, and our own Ed Ludlow will have that for us a bit later on. In Washington today, the president took the stage at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum and spoke about investment in the country just a day after his administration said it planned to greenlight the first sales of advanced AI chips to Saudi Arabia AI firm Humane. The president underlining his pitch to investors in the audience: America is open for business.
My message to all of the leaders and investors with us today, and they are the best in the world, is very simple. Under the Trump administration, America is back and America is open for business, and America is actually stronger than it's ever been before.
Joining us now with insight into these potential chip sales, we turn to Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, who joins us live from our Washington bureau. We couldn't have an Nvidia earnings night without Shep. Think of how many times we have talked about export controls, national security. With deals like these in mind, it doesn't seem to be holding back this administration.
No, it isn't. They are looking for ways to export what they call the American technology stack abroad, especially to deep-pocketed allies like the Gulf nations of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. During the president's visit to the region in May, we saw him talk about this and actually kick off a number of these arrangements with some of the emerging AI ventures that are coming from the kingdom and then from the emirate itself. And those refer to Humane, as we were just discussing now, but also G42, which is the counterpart in the United Arab Emirates. Each of them offers these two oil-rich nations a path to diversifying their economy, and it's critical for them. But it's also critical for the U.S. to find buyers of this technology, which can be pricey, but it's also a way of establishing an American foothold for American technology, in the administration's view, in a region that has also been subject to competition from China, which has its own AI challengers, including Huawei Technologies. And they are making their own AI chips, and it's something that Jensen Huang has repeatedly warned, that the U.S. needs to be out front, it needs to be selling in other markets, and he's even made the case for relaxing some export controls, even when it comes to the Chinese market too, Joe. So this is something we'll have to continue to watch. The one thing that does hold up all those visions, though, is just when the paperwork, those export licenses, are actually going to drop. And we've gotten news that Humane is on course to receive those approvals and be able to start selling those, buying those chips, that is, from Nvidia and other AI chip makers here in the U.S.
Mike, with numbers like we just saw Nvidia put on the board here, do they need access to that Chinese market for those very advanced chips, or are they able to sell other places and still be able to continue to grow at the rate that Jensen Huang wants?
Well, the demand that they are envisioning really doesn't include China. They have not included China in their forecasts, and yet Jensen Huang does see China as critical to his company's future and growth, and to the American edge in technology, especially artificial intelligence. And the reason is this, and this is one that some of the president's advisors actually embrace. To compete with China, you have to compete in China. At least that is how Jensen Huang sees it. He would favor selling China a deprecated or less advanced version of his market-leading Blackwell chip. But for now, the U.S. approvals for that are really off the table. It was something that was briefly discussed before the president's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, but it never really got off the ground. And there is a lot of skepticism here in Washington, especially among the China hawks we hear from so often, about the wisdom of doing exactly that.
Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. We thank you, Mike, as ever. As we keep an eye on Nvidia, shares rising after hours. The Wall Street Journal reporting the United States has approved a deal to sell AI chips to the Middle East. And joining us now for more on the impact on the U.S.-China relationship is Ann Neuberger, Payne Distinguished Lecturer at Stanford University, former Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology in the Biden administration. And it's great to have you back, and we welcome you. I don't want to turn you into a stock analyst tonight. We're more curious about the backdrop for this entire conversation, specifically when it comes to national security risks, export controls, and the deliberations that go behind transferring this type of sensitive technology. Are we creeping up on a line that begins to compromise our security?
It's a great question, Joe, and it's a central question in the overall strategic goals of this particular agreement. And we should know that the AI agreement is in the context of other agreements signed on civil nuclear cooperation and critical minerals, notably, which is a major issue in the U.S. competition, strategic rivalry with China. In the context of AI, the debate has always been, is it more important for the strategic rivalry with China for the world to run on the U.S. technology stack, to be in alignment with U.S. AI standards, or are the technologies so sensitive that sharing the most advanced U.S. chip technology, which could potentially leak to strategic rivals, notably China, isn't worth the risk? And that's at the core of the debate. And I think what we've seen is the Trump administration say, weighing in to say, we're making a strategic bet. Getting Saudi Arabia and the Saudi ecosystem to run on U.S. AI standards with the safeguards that are built into this agreement, notably 2 particular safeguards, will achieve our core goals of advancing U.S. technology while managing the risks.
And as you mentioned, there are a whole bunch of deals that were unveiled over the past couple of days here. AI and chips really at the center of that, but also energy defense. When you take all of these deals in total, who came out ahead, the U.S. or Saudi Arabia?
Great question. So first, let's talk about what each of them got out of it, right? The Saudis got real advancements on the military side with the sale of F-35s. Until now, heretofore, only sold in the region to Israel, which has really built advancements on the American F-35s as part of a strategic partnership between the U.S. and Israel. When we talk about civil nuclear cooperation and adherence with non-proliferation standards, and most importantly, when we talk about critical minerals, the Saudis' investment in a regional hub, right? So from the Saudis' perspective, it's advancements in really cutting-edge U.S. technologies. From the American perspective, as we talked about a moment ago, it's building the Saudi ecosystem on U.S. AI standards and critical minerals. Saudis help in actually refining and processing critical minerals that underpin defense, that underpin AI, that underpin manufacturing. Today, some statistics that show us the criticality of that, 90% of critical mineral key elements are refined and processed in China, 99% of heavy critical elements. So that's really significant in terms of having Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner, becoming a regional hub to do the refinement and processing, which is really where the strategic lock on the supply chain is in China's hands. So when you look at it, both seek to gain, both gain quite a bit from this agreement. The key will really be the national security safeguards built into some of the transfers of very strategic technologies on the military side, on the civil nuclear side, and on the advanced chip side.
Well, with your former cyber hat on, and I wonder how much you worry about the fact that China helped to build out the internet infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. And when you add Blackwell chips or advanced AI chips to that ecosystem, there are great concerns about this ending up in the wrong hands. Do you share those worries?
Exactly. I do. I share those concerns. These are advanced technologies, and we certainly don't want a strategic rival like China getting access to it. With that said, there are very strong technical controls, network controls, physical safeguards like access to data centers, as well as the broader strategic interest, right? These licenses are not one-time licenses, they're licenses over a period of time. And Saudi Arabia knows that the U.S. will be monitoring for any leakage to China and can turn off the licenses. So this is also a strategic bet on the Saudi side to say if they want continued access to this advanced technology, they need to be doing their best to safeguard. Now, to your point, China has one of the most advanced, well-resourced, sophisticated cyber hacking programs in the world. Most recently, the Saudi Navy did joint engagement with the Chinese Navy. So the Chinese will likely do their best to gain access to these technologies, and that's where the strategic partnership is important. I will note a quick point, which is, there have been, over the years, Saudi Aramco was one of the early purchases of U.S. advanced computing. We're talking about in the 60s and 70s. So there is a history of control of strategic technologies between Saudi Arabia and the United States.
We saw a really strengthening of ties between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. this week, both on the business side, but also very much between this warm relationship we saw on display between MBS and Trump. Do you envision that this relationship plays out past the Trump years, or is this really just contained to the next 3 years or so?
It's a great question, Laura. Saudi Arabia has been a key ally, like Israel, in the Middle East for the United States. There have been tensions in the relationship, clearly for various factors over time. And this is a U.S. investment by sharing such strategic technology. This is a Saudi investment by committing to spending $1 trillion in the United States that's making a strategic bet for the long term. Now, clearly, there will continue to be tensions that pull at that relationship, but this has been a long-term strategic partnership for the United States. And by laying down these investments on both sides with the controls, notably in the context of the strategic U.S. rivalry with China, it's a bet for the long-term future, too.
And thank you so much. Ann Neuberger, Payne Distinguished Lecturer at Stanford University. We really appreciate the conversation here as we watch shares of Nvidia climb in after-hours trading, now up a little more, well, almost 4% at this point, a little more than $7, back above $193, remembering that the all-time high set just last month was just above $212 a share. So we could have some headroom here if investors are all in on this. And Laura, it's impacting shares of all the companies in the neighborhood as we watch AMD, Intel, Qualcomm, and others. We're hearing some interesting headlines from the conference call now that Jensen Huang is talking, presumably from Washington, which I do find incredible that he's doing this here from the nation's capital. Laura, he says Nvidia is mapping out the three main reasons here, the purpose of this call as to why things will keep going when we hear so much talk about overspending or maybe a popping of the bubble. AI is changing existing work by making them more efficient, he says. Generative AI creating new workloads, and AI is coming to the physical world. When you consider these big thoughts and you look at the reaction on Wall Street, it reminds you of how much money is involved here.
And Jensen used some really interesting language here when he's talking around this bubble idea. He said it's not a bubble, but he said Nvidia had achieved a tipping point, which that sounds a lot like a bubble to me.
True.
They're kind of acknowledging that there is sort of this explosive growth that they're clearly a little bit worried about containing. Obviously they hit numbers after analysts were expecting that they might, kind of implode, but come 4 o'clock this afternoon, it was all green up on the board.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. And it's hanging in there at this point. As we mentioned, shares of Nvidia in after hours now up 4%, $7. We're just shy of $194 a share. We'll be back with a lot more here on Balance of Power. Ed Ludlow, who's got his ears on the call, will join us, and we'll talk to our political panel all ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Where are you, Jensen? Stand up. You have done such a good job. And you had a good 2 days, I understand, right? A good 2 days. How's Blackwell doing, okay? Any recent competitors? Anybody going to blow Blackwell away in the next week? They say 10 years. I don't know, maybe 2 years, 3 years. But you will not be stopping there. You'll be going further fast, right? An amazing job you've done.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Laura Davison in Washington. That, of course, President Trump speaking earlier today at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum here in Washington, praising Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang ahead of today's earnings report, which is now out. A beat and raise, stocks higher. Huang reassuring investors on the future of AI when speaking on the company's conference call after Nvidia beat estimates. Listen.
There's been a lot of talk about an AI bubble. From our vantage point, we see something very different. AI has also reached a tipping point and is transforming existing applications while enabling entirely new ones. For existing applications, generative AI is replacing classical machine learning.
Now, less than an hour from now, you're going to hear from Jensen Huang right here exclusively on Bloomberg TV and radio when he talks with Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech, who is back with us right now live from San Francisco. He's got one ear on the call and I guess one ear on Balance of Power. I don't know how you do this, Ed, but what are we learning here that's new?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, Jensen Huang, the CEO, and Colette Kress, the CFO, are trying to give the picture that the story is intact. You know, demand is still there, insatiable demand. You know, they are technically, as they put it, sold out of their current generation GPU, the Blackwell system. And that soundbite that you just play, what Jensen Huang went on to say is that there's a lot of evidence that the hyperscalers are getting revenues from this generative AI era. And now Nvidia is working with more software companies, enterprise software companies, the frontier model labs like OpenAI, and they too are showing tangible evidence of sales and growth because of the partnerships and investments they've made. That said, there are clearly a lot of questions from the analyst community about funding all of this and anxiety that actually those partnerships are good for it, that they have the money to fund what they are committed to buying from Nvidia.
What are we seeing here with the after-hours trade, Ed? A little bit of a pullback. Is that just par for the course or something that Jensen said?
A little bit par for the course. I mean, what was so interesting is that we got more detail on China, which was something we discussed earlier in the program. Actually, a lot of detail in China. It was through Colette Kress, the CFO. She explained that due to geopolitical issues, but also, frankly, a lack of demand, they didn't do any meaningful sales in China in the quarter gone, specifically of H20. She then went on to say that Nvidia is committed to working with the US government and the Chinese government to find a way to sell, quote, more competitive systems in China. We are actually kind of reading between the lines here. But it seems that they, were permitted to sell the H20 in the quarter gone. They just didn't because there wasn't demand for it. And that they have not yet reached any kind of agreement to sell a variant of Blackwell, the more powerful architecture in China. So there are still a lot of unknowns, but it was a surprise that in that moment, the stock didn't really move on it, given how important China is as a market and how many questions there were outstanding.
Fascinating. He's listening to the call, so you don't have to. Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech, we thank you. And importantly, make sure to catch Ed's interview with NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's a little more than a half hour from now, right here and only here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Let's bring in the panel. Joining us now with their reaction to everything we've talked about this hour, the NVIDIA earnings and the larger implications of this deal with Saudi Arabia. Adam Hodge is here, Managing Director at Bully Pulpit International, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group. It's wonderful to have both of you with us here back at the desk. Ashley, if Jensen is winning, is Trump winning?
Well, I think America's winning, and I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. The United States winning the AI war or the data center war and beating China is obviously something this administration and other administrations as well, I'm not going to take away from Biden, has put a lot of effort into. And I think that they're going to continue the path. Even with the announcements with Saudi yesterday and today, a lot of that is driven by this AI boom, and America has to stay on top of it.
Adam, we saw Jensen Huang probably have one of his best days in a long time today. He was called out by the president in this investment conference over at the Kennedy Center today, praising both him and his company. If you're advising NVIDIA, what do you go and ask for when you're having sort of this kind of day, this kind of moment?
Well, I think you just look at the last month. I mean, it feels like whether it was at the APEC summit in Asia, he's kind of been following the president around for the last month or so. I mean, and really throughout the year, the president and his administration have made a big bet on AI as the key driver, and in many ways, NVIDIA has been a bit of an American soft power or economic power and an economic pillar of American diplomacy as the company that is a future growth and future signal that you are partnering with the U.S. So Saudi investment deal today, right, that deepening partnership in the region is a part of that bigger bet on NVIDIA, on American companies, as the bet on the future. And, the China news right there at the end is interesting. Yeah. That they're not trying to buy the older chips, and they made some noises earlier about not wanting them for security reasons as well. So it really is a key benchmark for the geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China and the U.S. partnership with key countries around the world.
Yeah, China even suggesting at one point there could be a backdoor in these advanced Nvidia chips, although it does appear that they would still love to get their arms around them.
But that's always going to be an issue, though, I think, that generation.
Well, Huawei could tell you something about that
absolutely.
as well. We talked this hour with Dean Ball, who helped to write the regulations for the Trump administration, and we talked with a lawmaker and Chairman Jodey Arrington about the approach from Capitol Hill. Ashley, could we find ourselves a couple of years down the road saying, boy, did we miss an opportunity to control what many people consider to be a potentially dangerous technology?
Maybe, but I mean, that's kind of at least from the Republican side, we believe in a free market. We believe, listen, we are not good at regulation for anything unless something major happens and then they regulate backwards. Like, we still don't have a good cybersecurity law from 2001, right? I mean, we're still not caught up to where the industry is. So I think maybe, but we don't know. What else are we supposed to do, though, at this point? I think we have to let innovation go. We have to listen. I agree with you 100%, Adam. We're using this in regards to major national security deals as an asset of the United States. I mean, we were never able to do that with oil. We were never able to do it with like what the Saudis or UAE or anyone else says. And we're using these chips as part of our soft diplomacy, which was a great way to put it.
No, we are. I think the key thing going forward, and you mentioned the regulation question, something I remember being when I was in the White House, AI and the risks and reward was always attention. And it does pose tremendous potential. And people are using it in newfound ways every day. But there's no question the risk is real. I remember, Jake Sullivan and other folks at the White House had real concerns about the potential risk of bad actors using it to create weapons. And there is a real risk there. And I think, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had a Congress that could tackle big issues and address real problems that are pressing and have some foresight into the challenges of the future. That's what people should expect from their government. I think it's well within the realm of possibility that they could do it. But the question is, can politics and some of the bigger issues that get in the way find a way to the back burner? Because there's no question the future of the U.S. economy, the global economy right now is being written around AI.
For sure.
And so we have to stay on top of it. And Republicans and Democrats, they should be able to get together and say, look, this is the ticket. Whether it's railroads or he was talking about the light bulb or those types of major technologies, right? We found ways around those industrial revolutions in the past. And yes, there were problems, but we have to find a way to do it.
But the industry is like 10 times further ahead than Congress is.
Sure it is.
And by the time they get their act together to pass a bill, it's going to be 10 times more ahead of them.
That doesn't scare anybody here?
No, it is, but it's kind of, this is...
It's about the race now. It's about winning the race more than being careful, is what you're saying.
Well,
I don't want to put words in your
No,
mouth.
we have to be careful, but I think it's almost one of those things, even with like when you go back to Meta and Amazon and Google, they almost ended up regulating themselves because Congress still can't regulate. some of the children issues and the exposures on social media, we still don't have a law on that.
Right, yes.
That's been like 10 years.
So we'll be talking about this for 10 more years.
I'll be retired.
Well, maybe with AI. Adam Hodge and Ashley Davis, we're all real human beings, and we thank you for spending this evening with us. A reminder, Ed Ludlow and Jensen Huang, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to learn a lot on this one. Alongside Laura Davison, I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.